let me introduce a very special guest, Dr. Cary Cherniss, who is Professor Emeritus of Applied Psychology at Rutgers University. He specializes in the areas of emotional intelligence, work stress and burnout, as well as leadership development. And he has published over 70 scholarly articles and book chapters, as well as 9 books. And his most recent book is Optimal: How to Sustain Personal and Organizational Excellence Every Day with Daniel Goleman. And he also has consulted with organizations in both the public and private sectors. He's also the founding member of the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations, where he has served as its director and co-chair for 25 years. For those of you who don't know, Cary is also my professor while I was attending Rutgers University School of Applied Psychology. He has a great teacher, a great mentor to me, and I'm just truly honored to have him join us today to share on this important topic of emotional intelligence as the foundation of conscious leadership. So Cary, welcome to our community, and I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thanks, Po-Yi. I should say that Po-Yi is one of my best students, and I would say that even if she weren't here. So I want you to know that's a very, objective statement there.
Thank you.
I've been called many things, but I don't think I've ever been called a provocateur. So I will hopefully live up to the title and the role. Let me say a word about how I got involved in emotional intelligence, and then we can jump right in. For the first 25 years of my career, I was interested in the area of stress and burnout, particularly in human service organizations, but really in all kinds of organizations. And a lot of the work that was being done in that area, and I think this is still the case, focused on individuals and individual personality. What kind of a person burns out when they're under stress. And while that's certainly a factor, what my research found, and this was true for a number of other studies, is that it had even more to do with the setting that the person worked in or lived in. And of all the factors within the setting, such as, not enough time, too much to do, not enough time to do it, those sorts of things. One of the biggest factors was the person's boss or the leadership of the organization that the person was involved in. And so when I started learning about emotional intelligence, met Daniel Goleman back in 1995, right after he had published his first book on the topic, I realized that one of the things that helped leaders to be effective in many ways, but particularly in helping them to provide guidance and support for people who were at risk for burning out, was what Dan and others were calling emotional intelligence. So leadership has been the focus of my research like forever. And for the last 25 years or so, I've been particularly interested in the impact of emotional intelligence on leaders and their performance. But before I say any more about emotional intelligence, let me make sure that we all know what I'm talking about. Po-Yi, you want to go to the first slide? So there are a lot of different definitions and models of emotional intelligence. But the one that Dan and I use, and I think it's very similar to the others, involves these 4 dimensions. The first one is emotional self-awareness, the ability to identify how one is feeling and an understanding of how our feelings affect us and others. The second one is emotional self-management, which is the ability to control our impulses and feelings and to be guided by them rather than be overwhelmed by them. The third dimension of emotional intelligence is social awareness, the ability to tune in on the mood of a group or to understand how someone who is different may be feeling. And social awareness is really the foundation for empathy, which of course is a very important quality of leadership. And finally, the fourth dimension is relationship management, the ability to interact with others in ways that produce desired results on an emotional level. Now, I think one of the best ways to help you really understand these dimensions and have them come to life is one of my favorite examples, which I happened upon when I was doing some research for my last book on um, uh, uh, what is it? Feeling, leading with feelings. There we go. Um, so this was a CEO of a fairly large architectural and engineering firm, consulting firm, and they had been going through some pretty hard times economically and had to lay off workers for the first time. She met with her leadership team every week, and for many weeks, the emotional climate was very somber, as you might imagine. But then at one meeting, the chief financial officer gave a report, which was actually kind of promising. It looked like things were starting to turn around, but there was like no reaction in the group. A couple of people sort of nodded their heads, and when the report was over, they were all ready to move on to the next report on the agenda. Well, the CEO recognized this as a really important opportunity to help to improve the emotional climate and to help people to start feeling more hopeful and less helpless. So she jumped in and said, "Oh, wait a second, you guys, this is really good news. Let's go back to that report and think about, what have we been doing, which is starting to turn things around." And so they stopped and they spent the next couple of minutes or so talking about what they had been doing most recently to help produce this more positive financial report. And then they moved on. And at the end of the meeting, people got up and left. And rather than just, leaving the room with these frowns or serious looks on their faces, they were more relaxed. They were kind of laughing and well, maybe laughing is too strong a word, but sort of chuckling and talking to each other. And of course, the employees who were right outside that room, and they weren't, it was just a handful of employees, but they noticed that. One thing we know about organizational behavior and groups in general is that people in a group really follow the lead to the leaders, both the formal leaders and the informal leaders, just in terms of the emotional tone. And when leaders look like they're anxious, worried, depressed, that's really contagious. But fortunately, the opposite is true as well in terms of positive feelings. So what the leader did in that meeting, I think, had an effect of probably raising the morale of the entire organization. Now, it was a great example also of what we mean by emotional intelligence. When she was sitting in that meeting, what she was doing, like a lot of the leaders we studied for my first book, was she was constantly monitoring the emotional climate. And um, when she recognized that nobody was reacting positively to that positive report, she realized that this was actually an opportunity to raise the morale of the group and probably the whole organization. So she stopped them. And that was her emotional self-management, her ability to, go against the stream there and to really feel and express the positive emotions that she was starting to experience more and more. And she was able to tune into the mood of the group, as I said, recognize that the group was really not recognizing, that good things that were happening. And then she was managing those emotions and relationships by actually stopping them and having them start talking about how things are really picking up. So that's really what we mean by emotional intelligence. So let's now. I know what you're most of you are primarily here for is to think more about conscious leadership. So let's stop and think about how emotional intelligence and conscious leadership are related. Poyi, did you want to jump in on that one, or do you want me to?
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure as you're listening to what Cary's been describing, and I love that story to bring this to life more. One of the ways that we thought would be really helpful is for us to also do a little bit of personal reflection. So, given the 4 dimensions of EI that Cary just talked about, I just want us to pause here and take a moment and use the annotation feature if you can, or just share via chat. Because I'm already seeing a lot of really great chats going on here. But take a look at these 4 dimensions and pause here for a moment, right? Because this is about developing our own conscious leadership. And I know some of you are already very familiar with these 4 dimensions, but taking a look at it now, right? Maybe compared to when you first looked at it potentially many years ago. For me, it was like 20 years ago. Which of these really represent a strength you could leverage? And which of these areas do you still feel like it's an opportunity for you? So take a look at this and feel free to use annotate to stamp directly a heart or a tick mark onto the screen. And to do that, you should be seeing my screen share. And it says view options where it says right above the screen share, and it should allow you to click annotate, and a sidebar will appear, and there should be a little tick mark where it says stamp. And from the stamp, you will be able to toggle over to a heart or a tick mark. And for those of you who will be listening to this recording, I know we have a live audience here, but for those of you who are revisiting this topic, feel free to do this, pause the video and do the annotation or do some personal reflection in relation to these 4 dimensions. And again, feel free to, if annotation is not working for you, feel free to just share via chat as well. I can see we have a lot of hearts popping up around self-awareness. Also a lot of tick marks next to emotional self-management, and some popping up in relation to relationship management. This is really awesome. Thank you so much for that pause and the reflection. And I'm going to turn things over back to Cary to continue our dialogue here.
Okay, great. Let's move on to, well, first, let me just comment on all those hearts and check marks by the first dimension. That's really good, because while all of these dimensions are important, it seems as though emotional self-awareness is really the foundation for everything else. So you all have a good foundation to work on. Okay, Poyi, you want to move on to the next slide? Okay. Yeah, I think we can pass that.
I'm trying to clear the annotation, but carry on. I'm going to figure this out. There we go.
Okay, so what we wanted to do was to have you think about the connection, if there is a connection, hopefully there is, between emotional intelligence and conscious leadership. Those are the 4 dimensions. Then we have a nice, concise definition of conscious leadership. What we'd like you to do, and again, you can use the chat tool to do this.
Right. Okay. Let's move.
Is to think about the connections, the linkages that you see between emotional intelligence and conscious leadership. Is there an overlap here? Are they very similar in certain ways? So let's just take a minute or so to give you a chance to do that, and then we can move on.
And if anyone would like to unmute and jump in and share, all you have to do is to unmute or raise your hand, and we can call you as well to help you unmute. Cary, for me personally, I definitely see very clear linkages between the two. And I think I kind of alluded to that before. I felt like I learned about emotional intelligence almost 2 decades ago, right, from you. And I'm looking at it again, and I feel like this idea of conscious leadership is allowing me to have a deeper appreciation of even the definition that I just saw when it comes to self-management, when it comes to relationship management. I felt like after 2 decades of looking at emotional intelligence, I'm getting a deeper appreciation. I'm able to really channel that a lot more in my day-to-day, which I think require a lot of intention. So I really appreciate this topic here. But I can see here we have a hand up. Was it I think I saw, was it Dayton? Would you like to jump in?
Yes, thank
Did
you
I say
for
your name right?
You did. Thank you. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. This is my first time joining the group. Really excited
Welcome.
about today's chat. Thank you for the openness and welcome already. I initially, when I saw this 4 dimensions of EI and conscious leadership, think about how it is, I feel safe saying, nearly impossible to separate ourselves from our work. And so because of that, as leaders, when we're coming into any environment, it's not just making strategic decisions or operational decisions that sometimes are connected to outcomes, but the impact of those decisions often, impacts folks' emotions as well. So when I think about emotional intelligence and conscious leadership, it's like the consideration for the whole person and the whole being, and not sort of leaning into this idea that, we have our professional selves distinct from our personal selves. We're really always being ourselves in the moment.
That's beautiful, Dayton. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Joe, our friend Joe Maxson, come on.
Good afternoon. Well, the beauty that I see between the two of these is the pause that is required of us as individuals. Like we can't truly be self-aware, we can't be conscious leaders unless we're willing to pause and recognize, right, what's going on the inside and how am I going to show up the best way for myself and for the group that I'm working with. So there's definitely a correlation between the two here.
Thank you, Joe. How about Charles? Oh, I'll come back to you, Srijita. Charles, you want to unmute and share?
Hi everybody from chilly Florida. Yes, it's chilly here. It went down in the 30s last night. I realize that's not relevant to the northern temperatures. We had the opportunity, Renee and I had the opportunity during the pre-summit this past summer to talk about the role of emotional agility and interpersonal savvy. And as far as the link to conscious leadership goes, I'm of the firm belief that one can be emotionally self-aware, but if you don't have that balance of what I call emotional agility, the ability to read the situation, to read the circumstance, to respond accordingly, and then to deploy yourself using what I call interpersonal savvy, saying the right thing, the right approach at the right time to the right person. That balance of emotional agility and interpersonal savvy makes being emotionally aware the trigger to really manage those, self-manage those emotions, to feed this thing that we're defining as conscious leadership. And if we remember our pre-summit conference, if you don't do that, you do what we called through this really incredible video we shared with you guys at the pre-summit. You operate below the line in almost a subconscious fashion that triggers what I defined as inappropriate negative thinking patterns which really destroys your ability to be emotionally agile. And therefore, you transfer that lack of emotional agility onto other people. Even if you believe you're emotionally self-aware, if you don't practice being emotionally agile with interpersonal skills, it doesn't matter. So the bottom line for me, the link between conscious leadership and emotional intelligence has got to be driven by not just a single leader, but a collection of leaders in our communities and our organizations, by understanding that there's two human skills at play: interpersonal skills and intrapersonal skills. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Charles. Really appreciate that. Let me just turn things over to Sharjita, and I'll come back to Cary for commentary.
Hey,
Yes, hi.
hey everyone. Yeah, Poi, thanks for having me here. Thanks for sending me the invitation. This is my first time in this forum, so and an amazing topic. Thank you, Mr. Professor Cary, for sharing this with us. Because for me, emotional intelligence started again, like you, Poi, many years back. The kind of response I would have given today while annotating maybe 20 years back, if you would have asked me this, I wouldn't have given that. I would have probably ticked everything saying that I need to better everything. Today, I have come a long way. So for me, I see emotional intelligence as a inward kind of a skill that you need for yourself to maneuver in the world. Whereas conscious leadership, I see it as an outward skill, in the sense that how do you interact with your emotional understanding, emotional agility, emotional self-management, social awareness, relationship management with others. How do you project it on others? How do you make sure that, whatever how you interpret yourself, and how you interact with the rest of the world, and translate that leadership to your teams, to your colleagues, to your subordinates, and everyone else. And how do you create that role model? How do you create a leadership structure which works empathetically, consciously, and in a most aware manner, despite the uncertainties that we are seeing in this world right now? I feel conscious leadership is very essential. But as the person before me said, that you cannot have conscious leadership until you're practicing it. It is all in the action. So it must be consciously practiced. It is not an unconscious or a subconscious kind of effort. You have to put in effort, because we are not generally conscious about others that well. We are mostly conscious about our needs, our feelings, our emotions, and all that. How do we become conscious to everyone else is what I feel is the connection here. How do we bridge that gap between both of us?
Thank you, Sharjita. Thank you so much. I know we have one more hands, Greg, and I'll let you jump in. And I know we will have breakout time for all of us to jump in and share. There's definitely a lot of passion on this topic. But Greg, come on, unmute and tell us what you have on your mind.
Thanks. I'll make it quick because I know we want to move on. But one of the learnings for me about leadership is how much of it occurs through relationships and through meetings and conversations, and how much we take for granted those things. Sometimes we think we're pretty good at it because we do it every day. But as leaders, can we uplift? Can we really include people? And can we connect them with the shared purpose and the shared vision and the shared values and their personal values to that? And to do this well, consciously and with emotional intelligence, it requires courage sometimes to have those difficult conversations, those fierce conversations, to set boundaries when there's disagreements or misunderstandings. And often our brain wants us to avoid that, but we have to be able to step into that consciously in relationship. So that's what I wanted to add. Thanks.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everyone, for jumping in and sharing. And I just love how the conversation is really helping us make emotional intelligence more concrete, right? It's very intentional. It requires practice. It's about how we show up for, in alignment to ourselves, bringing our whole self to the service, but also how do we help ourselves and other people stay above the line, right? Because as Cary mentioned, emotions are contagious. And so how we show up, how we impact others very much rely on how we think of ourselves and how we channel our relationship, how we want to connect and support each other. So really appreciate this dialogue here. But Cary, let me just jump to you and maybe you could take us into the next segment here.
Okay, but wow, what a lot of terrific insights. I just want to stop here and listen to all of you more.
We could just keep going too, yes.
Yeah, but let me just quickly go through the rest of my thoughts here, and then I'll look forward to hearing more of what you all have to say. So in our new book, Dan Goleman and I focus on the relationship between emotional intelligence and optimal well-being. When Dan first wrote the book, the first book in 1995, and then a year later when we began the research consortium on emotional intelligence, there was very little research on the topic, and we were afraid that emotional intelligence would just turn out to be another one of those fads, you know, the fad of the fad du jour, and after a couple of years it would pass. But fortunately, thanks to the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence and Organization and the books and other material that's emerged, we now have a wealth of research on emotional intelligence, what it is, where it comes from, how to help people develop it, and particularly important, the relationship between emotional intelligence and optimal well-being. And a lot of this research does support the claim that the more emotionally intelligent a person is, the better their performance, the better they feel about their performance, about life in general, the better able they are to cope with stress. And particularly in the area of performance. Let's go to, well, no, wait, one more thing that I wanted to say is that we've now had, I think 5 or 6 different meta-analyses that look specifically at the relationship between emotional intelligence and what we're thinking of as optimal well-being. The most recent one looked at 99 studies. Now, I assume that most of you know what a meta-analysis is. For those of you who don't, it's just a statistical technique for pulling together a large number of studies that have been done by different researchers in different places that focus on the same topic. So the most recent one, which appeared in a referee journal a few years ago, looked at 99 different studies involving, I think it was 27,000, more than 27,000 individuals, and found a very strong relationship between emotional intelligence and performance, measured in all kinds of ways and in all kinds of different settings. But I know what we're most interested in here today, what I've been most interested in for a long time, is leadership. So let me just share with you the highlights of the research between the research on emotional intelligence, the impact of leader emotional intelligence on others. So Pogi, why don't you go to the first one there? One of the earlier meta-analyses, again, it's a meta-analysis involving a dozen studies and more than 2,700 participants. Very strong link between a leader's emotional intelligence and the performance of their employees in a variety of work settings. The next one that I wanted to just very quickly bring to your attention looked at entrepreneurs in all kinds of organizations, 3,700 entrepreneurs. And again, higher emotional intelligence was linked to really bottom line kinds of outcomes, which is what we like to see in making the business case for emotional intelligence. The higher the emotional intelligence for the entrepreneur, the greater their financial success, firm growth, and firm size. And in fact, emotional intelligence impact was more than twice that of IQ when they were both measured at the same time. Napoleon, why don't you move on to the next one? And I just wanted to stress that it's not just performance, although one of our primary tasks in the consortium was to kind of show skeptics or people who don't think of emotions as being very important in the world of work, to let them know that emotional intelligence is not just driving performance, but it's also important for job satisfaction, for fewer physical complaints such as headaches and upset stomachs. And for those of you who are in organizations and are trying to make the case for incorporating emotional intelligence in leadership training or development, these kinds of studies can be very useful to pull out and show them. So when you look at the recording, you can look at those studies and let me know if you have trouble tracking them down. Poi, why don't we go to the next one? I think we're just about done. Yeah, there was also, I just wanted to finish by talking about training. The question we often are asked at this point is, well, okay, so what do we do to help people to increase their emotional intelligence, to develop their emotional intelligence? Is there any research that suggests that we can do it? Well, again, we have a nice, not a meta-analysis, but a group of researchers went through the research literature and found 46 studies that were fairly rigorous evaluation studies of different kinds of emotional intelligence training programs. And they found that 39 of those 46 studies found a significant connection between increases in emotional intelligence as a result of the training and improvements in optimal performance and well-being. But it's important, I think, to end by noting that these studies are usually done on sort of model training programs that have been implemented with a lot of good thought and skill. And so I just wanted to end with this slide that what we've done is to pull together, looking at these different training programs, to identify what elements they seem to have in common, the most successful ones. And so these are the 5 that have emerged in the research that we've done. First of all, the participants ideally should be highly motivated. Sometimes you have someone who's really skeptical when they begin and the training turns them around. But most of the time, the training is just going to be a waste unless people really want to understand emotional intelligence and to use it in their work and also outside of work in families and community settings. The motivation is important. Also important is what Dan Goleman often refers to as the dosage. A lot of these training programs that we hear about involve, a 2-hour training session, maybe a day-long workshop, maybe a more intensive weekend on emotional intelligence. But very often what is gained in those is washed out pretty quickly when people get back to their families or their work settings. The ones that are really effective have 10 or more hours of training spaced out over time with periodic booster sessions. Ongoing practice and reinforcement are important. Social support when people are doing this in groups, small groups particularly, that tends to really increase the likelihood that the training will be effective. And then finally, active modeling and support of key organizational leaders. Unless they really walk the talk and model model emotional intelligence, the culture of the setting is really not going to support emotional intelligence development. So let me stop at this point. As I said, what I really wanted to do after listening to you for a few minutes was to get back to that. And also, we want to give you a chance to talk to each other a little bit more. So, Toyi, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Cary. This is super helpful, reminding us of the dimensions of EI and also sharing some of the more recent research and the meta-analysis. So I love the evidence-based data that we're being provided here to continue to help us learn more about this important topic. We did notice that there's a really interesting question in chat, and I'm just going to bring it up real quick. And Cary, I don't know if you could mention any information you might have. Rebecca, my valuable business partner here from Observer Leadership, she asked, she's really curious if there's any research on how our collective emotional intelligence has changed over recent years, and are people becoming more or less emotionally intelligent? Cary, how would you answer that? And then we'll get everybody into a breakout room to talk about that and more questions. But Cary.
Well, what I'd like to be able to do, as you probably figured out by now, I'm a research-driven kind of guy. I like to, pull out the perfect study or group of studies. I'm not aware of anyone who's actually tracked that over time. But I do know that the topic of emotional intelligence is becoming more and more popular, more and more people taking it for granted. And as some of you are probably aware, social and emotional learning has really become an important, I want to say dominant, probably not dominant yet, but an important part of the curriculum in school systems all over the country. And so again, I think it depends on how well those programs are implemented, but assuming that, most of them, or many of them anyway, are good programs, evidence-based programs that have been implemented well, it seems to me likely that emotional intelligence, particularly with younger people, has improved over time. But other than that, I think all of you are as good experts on answering that question as I am at this point.
Right. Well, thank you so much. I feel like all of us who are here are probably people who truly embrace this topic. And I wonder if we could also be create that movement, right, to each create a more positive environment that allow this, positive idea of emotional intelligence to create positive impact in our world, which is really awesome, because we want to give you a chance now to discuss this a little bit further within a smaller breakout room. And I know Anne is preparing us for that. But we've been listening to Cary, and part of the spirit of conscious leadership conversation is not only to listen to our provocateur and listen to one another sharing of our own ideas is also really critical. So we want to bring our intention and awareness into action. And that is why we want to give you a moment to pause, like Joe, you mentioned before, right? And consider these questions here in a small breakout room. How can you personally promote an emotional, intelligent, friendly culture in your team, whether it's a family or organization or a for-profit or nonprofit or part of your community? How can you personally promote a emotional, intelligent, friendly culture in where you are? And also, what might be one or two things, some of you already highlighted that, but what might be one or two things that you feel like we can do to foster such a culture? And what impact will that have within that environment? And so we want to give you a moment now to talk about that. We'll give you about 10 minutes in the breakout room before we come back for a large group debrief. So Anne, let me just check in with you to see if we're ready to jump in.
I had to get unmuted.
No worries.
Yes. So you'll be popping into rooms in a few minutes.
And we will share this slide in the breakout room so you can reference it as well.
Okay. I think everybody's in room, so let's pause the recording.
Welcome back, everyone. Really excited to have you back and seeing all these smiles and video turned on. I know we only have a few more minutes for today's session. I hope that we get to continue this discussion together beyond today, though. But in this moment, I'm just curious if maybe one or two volunteers can share a little bit of what you discussed in your breakout room. Yes. Anyone? Oh, Rebecca.
So I was actually in the breakout room with Cary. I feel so lucky that I got to ask him some questions. But one of the things that we talked about, and I'm assuming that many of you have probably experienced this, is what do you do in situations where the person who is in charge, who has the power or authority above you or above others, lacks emotional intelligence? And I've seen this in the organization where I'm working, and it can be challenging. And so we talked about how one strategy that you can do is really manage your own emotions. Like when you're dealing with somebody who is in a higher authority who's not demonstrating it, you can focus on how can you manage your own emotions, and then possibly try to subtly influence that other person.
Nice.
Thank you for sharing that, Rebecca. We always talk about leading self first, right? So like sometimes we have to go first and create that ripple effect. So appreciate that. Greg, and then we'll go to Charles.
I was in a room with Miriam, and wow, it was just awesome. So I think listening was a really key focus of ours. We both agreed on sort of modeling emotional intelligence, pausing in the conversation, making sure that we come back to the common goal and understand each other's perspective, and have the patience to like have the silences and the deep understanding, even kind of getting on the balcony and observing the conversation, and then giving and receiving feedback, right? Because we might not be good self-evaluators when it comes to emotional intelligence, and being open to change. And a lot of that comes down to listening. So very, very rich discussion. Thanks.
Love it. It's so concrete too, right? We forget to listen sometimes. I always say in a conversation, I'm always preparing to think about what am I going to say next, as opposed to truly listening and absorbing what people are telling me. So I love that reminder. Charles.
I had the privilege of a great conversation with our colleague from Ethiopia, and we got into we started out talking about the socialization piece of it, because the reality is, and this is true in all the 26 countries I've visited and worked in and lived in, and it's very true in the United States because I live here too. In the world of work that we live in, public sector, private sector, it's not appropriate to share your feelings. Well, the human beast is a feeling-driven, emotionally driven person. So why is it uncomfortable in most organizations for us to share our feelings? We need to create cultures that people are comfortable saying, here's how I feel about that, where leaders are comfortable saying, tell me how you feel about that. And we even had a brief discussion about the gender differences. I mean, growing up in the 40s and 50s here in the United States, there's no crying in baseball. You're a boy, you should not cry, And then you go into the world of work where the male is still dominant, thumbs down leader approach, creates this environment where, men are rigid and female's gonna cry. And I, sometimes I throw my hands up in disgust, because that's not the reality of being a human being. So our bottom line discussion was, we need to create cultures that allow people to share their real feelings, but do it in a way that's constructive and positive.
Thank you, Charles. Really appreciate all the sharing. And these are really concrete techniques that we can be bringing to our organization wherever we are leading.